My thighs still held the outline of the velvet cushion, like the night had pressed a memory into me. The mirror across the room caught my posture, straighter than guilt should allow. I didn't fix my robe. I fixed my gaze. That silence between us wasn't shame. It was a secret we both agreed to carry without a word. I didn't fall. I walked in with eyes wide open. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. Brittany has a way of holding on to weather like grief. It doesn't rage, it lingers. The sea was somewhere behind the fog, breathing slow and heavy against the cliffs, like an old god half asleep. Inside the house, everything sounded softer than usual, softer than memory should allow. Henri had gone to the market. He left the radio on low, an old jazz record with more static than sound. I didn't turn it off. I just stood there watching the light bend on the kitchen tiles like something had shifted, imperceptibly but forever. It had been years since I was touched by accident, longer still since it meant anything. Henri was kind, of course, dutiful in the way a man becomes when love becomes routine. He brought me tea without asking. He tucked blankets around me on the couch, but his hands no longer paused when they touched my arm. His eyes, when they met mine, looked through a version of me I hadn't been in years. Then Luke came home. 26. Quieter than I remembered. Broader in the shoulders, though he still walked like he didn't want to be noticed. The last time I had seen him, he was 18 and leaving for university, suitcase too big, goodbye too short. He hadn't called me anything back then. Not Claire. Not stepmother. Just her. He arrived with little more than a duffel and a silence that folded into the house like mist. Henri greeted him with relief, a long hug and too many questions. I stood at the doorway, unsure whether I was host or guest in that moment. Luke nodded at me politely, said, "It's good to see you." I almost believed him. That night I found his shoes by the door, still wet, soles caked with dark sand from the cliffs. I touched them without thinking. My fingers came away damp, as if something living had been left behind. I wiped them clean, then stared at my hands longer than I meant to. The first time I saw him again, really saw him, was the next morning. I came into the kitchen barefoot, robe loose, sleep still clinging to the back of my neck. The window was open just a crack, letting in the scent of salt and wood smoke. Luke stood by the sink, shirt damp from the rain, his hair tousled like it didn't know where to settle. There was something about the way he held the mug, both hands steady, reverent, that made me pause. He didn't speak, just looked over his shoulder, slow, careful. Not startled, just aware. I turned to reach for the sugar and realized my hand was trembling slightly. I told myself it was the chill from the wind, that he hadn't noticed, that I hadn't noticed. But the silence that passed between us felt thick, not heavy, not awkward, just aware. Like a wire pulled taut between two buildings, not ready to snap but no longer slack. He poured the coffee slowly. I didn't move. When he passed the cup to me, our fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt charged, like the last breath before lightning strikes. I took the mug. He nodded. I said thank you. He didn't answer. And still I couldn't stop thinking about how he held it, with both hands. That afternoon, I found my camera buried in the drawer. Dust on the lens, battery dead. I hadn't used it in 3 years. I charged it without thinking. I didn't plan to photograph him, but I cleaned the lens anyway. There's a particular kind of silence that only exists in houses by the sea, where walls swell with damp and secrets. Ours had begun to hum with it. Not loud, not obvious, just present, like something waiting to be named. Every morning, I entered the kitchen 10 minutes earlier than usual. Not enough to call it anticipation, just enough to ensure I would leave at the exact moment Luke walked in. It became a rhythm neither of us acknowledged, but both obeyed. The first few times I told myself it was coincidence, that houses creak and people drift. But coincidence doesn't carry that kind of timing. Not when your hand is still on the cupboard handle, and you hear his breath behind you. Not when you close the door just as his reflection passes across the window pane. He never said anything. Neither did I. But tension doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's just a teacup placed with more care than necessary. Or the way light touches two faces from opposite angles, making one clearer than the other. He had taken to reading by the large window in the sitting room. Always late afternoon. Always with the same quiet steadiness, Like his presence was something the house had to relearn each day. One afternoon I passed by and saw the book title, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Tucked halfway through was a Polaroid, weathered but sharp-edged. I didn't look at the image, just the way it bent the page like memory insisting on being felt. That night, I stayed in the bath long after the water cooled. I lit 2 candles instead of 1. Not because I needed light, but because flickering things feel more honest. My wardrobe shifted too, without decision. Dresses that whispered. Fabrics that held shape for a second too long after I moved. Nothing too revealing. Just a softness I hadn't worn in years. Luke noticed, or maybe I only hoped he did. Hope has a way of dressing itself as imagination. One day, without looking up from his book, he asked, "Do you still take pictures?" It was the first time he'd spoken to me alone. The first time he called me you. I didn't answer. Not out of discomfort, but because the question wasn't really about photography. It was about attention. About whether I remembered how to see. The next morning, I lingered near the sink longer than I needed to. He passed behind me, close enough that I could feel the space around him shift. Not a touch, not even a breath, just heat rearranging itself. I placed my mug down and paused. I could have left. I should have. But my hand rested on the table a moment too long, like it wasn't mine anymore. He didn't say anything, but neither did he move away. That evening I found the Polaroid left on the kitchen counter, face down. No note, no explanation. I didn't flip it over. I just stood there staring at the blank back of it, as if it might tell me what to feel. Henri had left that morning for a trip. A short one. He kissed my cheek like punctuation, soft, practiced, already fading. The house exhaled differently once the door clicked shut. And I, without meaning to, exhaled too. The rain had paused. A gray light pooled across the floor, muted and watchful. I stepped out of the bathroom, towel around me, not because I forgot, but because I didn't check. The hallway was quiet, but quiet no longer meant alone. Luke was standing by the bookshelf near the kitchen, back to me. A record played, low cello, long strokes, minor notes. He turned at the sound of the floor creaking under my heel. Slowly. Not startled. Just aware. Our eyes met. Longer than necessary. Longer than polite. Longer than safe. He didn't look away. Neither did I. I felt the fabric slip slightly, not because of movement but because of stillness. Because something in me wanted to stop pretending I hadn't noticed him noticing. It didn't fall. Not yet. But my hands didn't move to catch it. I took one step forward. His shoulders didn't shift. No invitation, no retreat. The air between us thickened, not with heat, but with a kind of breathlessness that doesn't come from running. A pause bloomed. One of those long, quiet ones that hang between questions never asked. Then, in a voice that barely reached me, he said, "Do you want me to look? Or stop?" I wasn't sure where the answer came from, only that it had been waiting. "I want you to stop, if I'm no one to you." Another beat of silence. A breath. Maybe mine. Maybe his. The towel slipped the rest of the way. I let it. He didn't move toward me. He didn't need to. Presence has a gravity of its own. I stepped into it. And when our foreheads nearly touched, I felt something old inside me flinch. Not from fear, but from recognition. Like brushing against a version of myself I thought had died quietly, somewhere between dishes and decades. We didn't speak. We didn't rush. What passed between us didn't demand. It remembered. It remembered what it meant to be chosen without obligation. Held without assumption. Seen without apology. I wasn't cold. But the wood floor registered as sharp beneath my heel. The sound of the cello filled the air like fog, slow, swallowing, unsentimental. His hand found my waist. Not with urgency, but with permission. And I, in that moment, did not feel desired. I felt returned. When it ended, whatever it was, I rested my head against his chest without realizing. And when I finally pulled away, I left something small behind. A mark. A memory. A pause. Not a promise. Just a proof. I didn't shiver. But the floor was cold. And I couldn't tell if the wind at my back was from the sea or from myself. I washed the porcelain cup slowly, as if the water had to make its way through time. It still held the shape of his breath, an invisible impression on the rim, a warmth that had turned to memory. I didn't scrub it. I only watched the stream flow over it, quietly like rain over a stone that never dries. When I placed it upside down on the rack, I did so gently like returning something borrowed. Luke was gone the next morning. His room was neat, the bed made with the kind of carefulness only people who don't plan to stay use. Nothing missing. Nothing left behind either. But I noticed the curtain in the hallway slightly pulled back, as if someone had stood there for a long while, and then stepped away. Henri came home with the smell of wet wool and orange peel. He asked, "Luke's quiet, isn't he?" I nodded, folded a towel. Said nothing. No one mentioned the shift in the house, but it moved through the air like a low current. Luke avoided the kitchen when I was there. I lingered longer, pretending to rinse things twice, waiting for steps that stopped just beyond hearing. At night I left the door half open. A signal. Or a test. But silence answered gently and always. He didn't pass by the hallway again. And yet sometimes I felt it, the pull. Like someone thinking of knocking but not lifting a hand. I walked to the cliffs alone now in dawn's half-light, without my camera. I told myself it was just air I needed. But the truth had less poetry. The tide had pulled back far that morning. I stepped between the rocks, still damp and breathing. There, lodged in a crack, was a shell, black polished by years. Picked it up. It was cold and solid in my palm, heavier than its size allowed. Not beautiful, but undeniable. I put it in my coat pocket and didn't take it out again. That evening, I sat by the window with a book open but unread. The lamp beside me flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the hallway I heard the floorboard shift. A memory or something more stubborn. The towel from that night remained unwashed. Folded neatly, not hidden. Not displayed. I didn't know what it meant, only that I hadn't touched it since. One morning I found a feather on the windowsill, gray, damp, delicate. I didn't know where it came from, but it felt like something left on purpose. Once through the glass I caught Luke's reflection in the garden, head tilted up, eyes closed toward the wind. He didn't know I was watching. Or maybe he did. Either way, neither of us moved. I started hearing the sea at night, even with the windows shut. I thought I would feel guilt. But what I found was something quieter, more difficult to name. Fracture. Small. Spreading. Not loud enough to break, but loud enough that I could never unhear it. And then I received the letter. I found the note on a Thursday. The kind of day when the wind doesn't stir but the curtains still shift, like something unseen had passed through. It was folded into the back pages of The Unbearable Lightness of Being, left as if it belonged there, among ideas about weight and meaning and all the things we try not to name. There was no date, no signature, just a line and a fracture. I saw you 7 years ago, not like a mother, but like someone who once carried light in her eyes. I read it once, not aloud. The ink had bled just slightly into the paper fibers, as if it too had waited too long to speak. I tore the note in half. One part floated to the floor, slow as confession. The other I slid back between the pages where fiction and memory now blurred. Henri left for a business trip that evening. 3 nights. I didn't count them, not out loud. I went into Luke's room, telling myself it was to straighten things. But my hands searched differently. In the bottom drawer I found a small envelope. Inside, a Polaroid. The kind that feels stolen by accident. It was me. Years ago. Hair windblown. Back turned. Standing at the edge of the shore in a white dress that now only lives in storage and memory. I knew the day. I knew the moment. I had believed I was alone. I laughed quietly. Not from joy. From a kind of strange mercy. Because for once someone had seen me, when I wasn't trying to be seen. I once told Henri I didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe that hasn't changed. But someone once thought I was worth pausing for. That's something. That night I stood in front of the mirror longer than I meant to. Not searching for youth or beauty. Just presence. Just proof. The bathroom was filled with steam that clung to the glass like breath withheld. I didn't wipe it away. I pressed my fingertips to it and watched the marks fade slow. As if even that brief imprint resisted vanishing. There was no music. Just the old hum of the ceiling light. And somewhere faintly the sound of the sea hitting stone. In Luke's room the bed remained made. I didn't touch it. But in mine I left the curtain half open, for no reason I could explain. Not so someone might come in, but so I could see out. The half of the note I'd kept lay on the nightstand, catching the dim glow from the hallway. Not quite a memory. Not yet a promise. I didn't sleep immediately. Not from regret, but from wondering what it means to be seen and still not step back. That night I decided to try again. The house was silent that morning, except for the sound of paper sliding under my hand. I'd been up before the sun, not restless, not waiting, just still. There was no music, no coffee brewing. Only me, a pen, and a letter that wouldn't travel. I didn't write it for Luke. Not truly. I wrote it because something inside me needed to leave the room. Not escape, just arrive somewhere else. You weren't the only one who learned to look. I've learned how not to flinch. Thank you for reminding me that I still have skin, and that it still feels wind. 4 lines. No name. No date. Just breath pressed into ink. I folded the paper slowly, the way you might fold a memory you're not quite ready to relive but no longer want to hide. The photo album was still where I had left it, near the back of the shelf under old magazines. I slid the letter into it right behind the Polaroid. The one he had taken of me before either of us had said a word worth remembering. In the photo my back is to the camera. My hair is windblown. I'm in motion, unaware of being seen. And yet, I've never looked more certain I existed. That was the part he gave me, not presence but proof. And I was keeping it. Outside the sky was undecided. Half clouds, half gold. I walked down the narrow trail toward the bluff, the same path I used to take just for the air. Today I brought the towel. Not to use. To leave. It was soft from too many washes, corners frayed like thoughts held too long. I'd wrapped myself in it the morning he hadn't left, when something irreversible hummed in the silence between rooms. That towel had held too many versions of me. The wife, the mother, the woman not quite looking in mirrors anymore. I stood at the edge. The sea wasn't loud today, it murmured. Like it knew I was listening. I didn't toss it. That would have meant anger or statement. I let it fall quietly from my fingers. The wind caught it briefly, just long enough to make me believe it might fly. And then it dipped, spun once, and disappeared over the cliff. Are you cold? Henry's voice rose behind me. He wasn't near. He didn't know what I'd done. I turned just enough to be heard. No, I said. I just started to feel warm again. We didn't speak after that. He walked back. I stayed. Not to wait. Not to watch. Just to be. The air didn't bite. It touched. And I breathed it in not because it was easy but because it didn't ask for permission. I used to be someone who stayed inside the frame. Now I was the woman behind the photograph, seen once and never the same again. When I returned to the house, I left the album open. First page, me in sunlight, half turned, not posing. Next page, the letter folded but not sealed. Waiting for no one. That was enough. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't even need answers. Only that moment. Mine. I wasn't looking for something forbidden. I never was. I wasn't searching for attention, or for some dangerous spark to ignite the quiet life I had. What I wanted, what I finally let myself want, was to be seen while I was still here. I didn't stumble into anything. I stepped in. Eyes open. Breath held. And when it passed, I didn't ask to be forgiven. I don't need to explain the fire to someone who never felt the smoke. I'm not a woman who was lost. I'm someone who paused once on the edge of the frame and decided not to step back in. There was a time I apologized for taking up space. I whispered my needs into pillows. Smiled in the pauses of someone else's sentence. I thought wanting too much made you ungrateful. Or worse, undeserving. But why do we always lower our voices when what we need is rising inside? Sometimes the deepest freedom isn't leaving. It's staying and no longer hiding. Sometimes the most radical act is not rebellion. It's simply not saying I'm sorry for being awake in your own skin. If there was a moment in this story that made you stop, made you feel something unspoken stir, like wind brushing against a memory, then maybe leave a mark. Not for me, for you. Like a word, a pause in your evening. So someone else, sitting quietly, wondering if it's too late to be seen, knows they're not the only one still breathing. Because sometimes all it takes is a quiet story, told the way it happened. And maybe that's why he never came back. Because he already gave me what I didn't know I needed. And I kept the letter. A photo on the table. A woman in sunlight, not posing. A folded paper tucked behind the smile. Still unopened. Still enough.